Has the relationship between the Baltimore Ravens and Lamar Jackson officially become irreparable? We talk about that, Lamar Jackson's latest tweets, looking at the situation and why this has been such a long and drawn out process. Look at free agent targets for the Ravens, what the Ravens could do moving forward in free agency, and so much more coming up next here on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher, Ravens Wire. We're here as always on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for tuning in with us here on Locked On Ravens, making us your first listen every single day. Free and available on all podcasting platforms, including over in video form on YouTube. So if you are here with us on YouTube, you can see my face in my background. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel as well, turn notifications on. We're 5 days a week here on Locked On Ravens. So any Ravens news, analysis, updates, we are here for you Monday through Friday. And again, any big moves that the Ravens have, signings, trades, whatever it may be, we'll have live streams, we'll have episodes for that here over on YouTube, and also in audio form, the same show, both audio and video. So be sure to follow along anywhere you get your podcast in audio form if you want the audio version of the show. But we have a lot to talk about here today. And you guessed it, it all dates back to Lamar Jackson. It all comes back to Lamar because there have been some pretty big developments in this whole situation. And I just want to talk about what's been the latest here. And it seems like there's something new every single day to talk about. And it's draining. It's exhausting. I'm sure a lot of people are feeling that way. And I just want to talk about if the relationship between the Ravens and Lamar Jackson is becoming or already is irreparable, because with each day that goes by, there just seems to be something that pops up. So we'll talk about that in the first segment. Also talk about Lamar's tweets, what he put out there, contract detail wise, disputing reports. So we'll talk about that as well. Then in the second segment, it's going to be kind of a combination of Lamar and free agency, where it's almost like, who's to blame? What can the Ravens do in this situation? And who's available now? Because there were some updates in free agency, guys going off the board, potential Ravens targets. We'll talk about who went off the board, who the Ravens still could get in that second segment. Then in the final segment, we'll talk about mailbag questions, wide receiver targets. We'll talk a bit about what the Ravens could do scheme-wise a bit. And also, if we have time, we'll get into some mock drafts there. So again, jam-packed episode here today, and it all starts with Lamar. So let's talk about Lamar here. Now, Lamar put out, the Baltimore Beatdown account ended up, well, first of all, before we get there, Adam Schefter ended up on the Adam Schefter podcast confirming a report that, he put out, and Chris Mortensen, it was a joint report put out in September about the guarantees. And pretty much what he said is Lamar was offered a deal and turned down a deal. Reportedly, there was $133 million due at signing, $175 million with injuries, and then $200 million a springing guarantee if he was on the roster on the 5th day of the 2026 league year. Now, that springing guarantee is pretty much like what you see with players across the league, where it's this amount becomes guaranteed if they're on the roster on X day of X league year or before the league year starts. So Adam Schefter even said, he's not necessarily calling that a guarantee, but the money would go up. That amount gets guaranteed if Lamar would have been on the roster by 2026. Now, Lamar, the Baltimore Beatdown account posted, Schefter confirmed this report in the actual tweet that the Baltimore Beatdown account said was Lamar Jackson turned down $200 million guaranteed deal back in September. Lamar Jackson responded to that, quote tweeted it with a GIF from a TikTok of a guy wearing a bunch of hats, pretty much calling the whole situation cap, calling it not true, or at least implying that it wasn't true. Then below that said 133/3 years fully guaranteed, but I need an agent ? And then a laughing face and a kind of face palm emoji. And then after that said, people throw, a poop emoji at the wall and hope it sticks with a laughing face. So Lamar clearly got wind of this and wanted to say, hey, this is what really is going on. And we got it from the mouth, or I guess the fingers on Twitter fingers of Lamar Jackson here. And again, it just adds on to a very long and drawn out process. And if you go back to what Eric DeCosta said a couple weeks ago, he kind of wouldn't get into contract specifications, details, said that there was an agreement by the Ravens and Lamar. This has been going on for a while, where they wouldn't leak anything, where they wouldn't put out details that be negotiated in good faith, and they wouldn't put that out. Well, that doesn't seem like it's being followed here. So I don't know what that is. If this is that, I'm sure Eric DeCosta and the Ravens front office is not necessarily thrilled with this development. And I mean, this whole situation, I think, is just, it's gone on way too long. And with each thing that comes out, with each national media narrative, every Lamar tweet, every potential contract, every report, every detail, it just becomes so much more, I don't even, annoying. It's like all this different stuff combines into one for a situation that really could have been solved a long time ago. You obviously have the NFLPA and Lamar Jackson's ear. The Ravens don't want to give him the fully guaranteed deal. Lamar Jackson holding out for that fully guaranteed deal under the advice of, the NFLPA, his team, and not an agent. And I think to be completely honest, this whole situation has been handled pretty poorly by both the Ravens and Lamar Jackson. And at this point, a lot of people probably share this. I'm ready for it to just be over. Like I am ready for this situation to have a resolution one way or the other, whether it is two resolutions, an extension where he stays or he moves on. And it's either a trade or he leaves and the Ravens get those 2 first-round picks, which I still think wouldn't be a great haul for Baltimore. But at this point, it's again tying the Ravens' hands behind their backs, and it seems like I'm repeating the same stuff every single day. Where we see these guys go off the board, the Ravens have to create their cap space. They move on from Calais Campbell. They restructure some guys. We'll talk about some of the moves they made in the second segment to kind of get under and very far under the cap, at least somewhat far under the cap. But Brian McFarland does great work over at Russell Street Report. I've referenced his work a bunch of times, salary cap wise. After the Chuck Clark trade goes through, Baltimore is apparently going to have about $10 million, a little more than $10 million in cap space. That's enough to do something, but you also have to take into account restricted free agency. You got to sign your draft class if you're the Ravens. You got to bring back a couple of your own guys too. Maybe a Marcus Peters, maybe a DeMarcus Robinson, a Justice Hill, a Justin Houston. The Ravens, and there are still other opportunities. Brian McFarland also put out there opportunities, I think, right around $25, $26 million with other extensions, other restructures. They still have that wiggle room, but having Lamar free up, whatever it is, even if it's just $5 million or $6 million, you have that long-term security at one, the position, but two, in a contract where you can, again, depending on guarantees, make the money work or whatnot. I don't know. I mean, in terms of, what the first topic here today is the relationship irreparable? And it's actually a question that it was, we do mailbags here on Wednesdays, and Snow Moose asked, do you think the Lamar relationship with the organization is fractured? His latest tweets lead to believe as much. And I think both sides are just tired. They're fed up that something hasn't gotten done. I mean, it must be super exhausting and super annoying. And at this point, I don't know if I would call it completely fractured, completely irreparable, but it's not trending in the right direction, in my opinion. Like, I don't think this is at the rate it's going. If this continues on into April, into May, into June, into July, I think it's going to continue to deteriorate. So while I don't think it's completely unsavable, I think this can still be saved. It can still be salvaged. I think that's 100% still a possibility. But at this point, I mean, you have some of the fan base completely turning on Lamar. I think a lot of fans, again, are just ready for this to be completely done, completely over. But with the organization and Lamar, with Lamar not accepting a deal, and look, it's not all on Lamar. It's not all on the organization. There, two peas make a pod here. It takes two to tango, whatever phrase you want to use. But in Lamar's case, his, not signing a deal has impacted the Ravens salary cap wise. It is, they've had to go through multiple different paths here in terms of, well, are we going to have a franchise quarterback here for the long term? Is he going to be on the $32.4 million? Is there going to be a trade where they get assets? I mean, they have to ask themselves those questions every single day while the situation isn't resolved. And today is the day, March 15th, where Lamar can start talking to teams. We'll talk about a potential team or two that are actually realistic fits for him in the second segment. But again, as this drags on here and we just don't have any sort of resolution, the Ravens will continue to have their hands maybe not fully tied behind their back as they continue to make room, but they don't have all the freedom they could have. And I think that is what is aggravating some of the fan base at this point. And on Lamar's side of things, he clearly believes what he is worth. I don't blame him for wanting to stick up for what he believes he's worth. I think for players, this is a business. The NFL is a business. players should be able to say, hey, I am worth this much and I'm not going to sign until this, that, and the other. But then the organization, on that end has to be like, well, at this point, we have to either move on or give him what he wants or whatnot. And it's just, it feels like it's in a stalemate that isn't getting resolved anytime soon. And that to me is the worst case scenario if this continues to drag on, because as free agency goes on, the Ravens might have one or two guys they really want, but they can't make the money offer they want to because they just have to have that $32.4 million there. Him playing on the franchise tag, even if he just signs the franchise tag and they're not going to negotiate till next year, that to me would be that's still not ideal to me. I don't want this dragging on any longer personally. I'm sure the Ravens don't. I'm sure Lamar doesn't. So there are plenty of things, but it's very fragile. And I think that the relationship between the Ravens and Lamar Jackson, again, I'm sure that, Lamar's just been tired and fed up with all these reports coming out that, haven't been necessarily true. And he's not thinking that, he wants to go on with, oh, well, I have to do this for another 2-3 months. But I think him having an agent would have definitely sped up this process. Now, not every player needs an agent, right? Like Roquan Smith got that deal done without an agent, and the Ravens and him were able to agree on that 5-year, $100 million extension. This is a completely different stratosphere, completely. An example here of an agent doing good work for a player is for Matt Ryan. The Colts released him. His agent actually negotiated a contract that included a $12 million guarantee in 2023 that wasn't in his previous contract when that trade went through. So even though Ryan got released, he still is entitled to that $12 million regardless of anything he decides to do this season. And that is an example of how an agent, I think, could have, one, sped up this process. Information could have been put out there that I think would speed up this process. So again, I just think it hasn't been handled very well by both the organization and Lamar. I think there is blame to go around on both sides here. I'm not pinning it all on Lamar. I'm not pinning it all on the Ravens. But this offseason has been tainted by this whole thing that's been going on for the past year or in change. It just feels like it's a never-ending cycle of me getting on here every day and saying the same stuff, where I want to be talking about, oh, the Ravens signed this guy, the Ravens signed that guy, and all these other teams going out there and making moves. And in the second segment, we'll talk about what the Ravens did, which is admittedly not very much. So be sure to stay tuned for that. We'll continue talking about Lamar and so much more coming up next here on Locked On Ravens. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And the midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes, drains. And I'm telling you, my Denver Nuggets are not doing super well here. 4-game losing streak, lose to Toronto last night. They cut it to 3, but they just cannot get the job done there. So still Nikola Jokic triple doubles looking pretty good over on FanDuel. Those odds, and they have so many more exclusive bets over there, like the 2x3, which is 2 3-pointers scored in the first 3 minutes. Plus FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. So I missed your chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets. You can go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. We are back here. It's our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this Wednesday edition. It's the first day officially of the new league year. So Lamar Jackson, that means he can talk to teams now. He can get his feelers out there. And there are a couple teams that I think legitimately could have some interest in him. And I know people are kind of looking at the Patriots and what they could potentially do in terms of looking at Lamar. I think the Colts, to me, could be the most realistic option. They're clearing out some cap space right now. They obviously don't have a quarterback. They have the number 4 overall pick. That could be something where they go and take that young quarterback of the future, but they do have some win now pieces. And I think that they could go after a guy like Lamar and maybe give him that contract that he wants. So that's a team to watch. Others that have kind of bowed out at this point, the Dolphins and the Panthers and the Raiders, and, I could go on. The Falcons are making some big money moves there. There are a lot of teams that are officially, or at least not officially, but they've made the moves to signal, hey, we're not doing this in this regard. And I know there have been the reports about the Patriots not going out there and pursuing Lamar. But again, these are just reports at this point. We'll end up seeing, and maybe we'll get some more reports about teams actually talking to him and getting their feelers out there. It doesn't hurt to talk to him. He's a franchise quarterback after all. But I don't know. It still feels like the most realistic chance at Lamar right now. At least the team that has that shot is the Ravens and Lamar. It feels like that still is what I think is going to happen. Now it's definitely 50-50. And honestly, my trust in that happening is deteriorating with every single thing that goes on here, but just something has to happen. Some resolution has to be brought up here by either side and said, hey, look, we're just going to do this. We need to either move on or move forward together, because it is it's like that DeMarcus Cousins interview, I think, at the end of a game years and years ago. He was in Sacramento and he goes, this is getting ridiculous. Everybody knows it's getting ridiculous. And this is it. It's getting ridiculous how long this has gone on, how stale things seem to have gotten in the situation, and how there seems to be very little movement and everything here. And my whole thing, and again, I'll throw off this theory again, I don't think this will be good for the Ravens, but I think Lamar, you could risk it. It's still a risk for Lamar, but playing on 2 franchise tags like Kirk Cousins did, I think if he plays on 2 franchise tags, that is 2 full amounts of fully guaranteed money. And whatever the non-exclusive tag will be next year, he'll get that. The non-exclusive franchise tag this year is the 32.4. It's not quite getting your 40, 45, $50 million, but Lamar, it's a risk for a couple reasons if Lamar does that. One, obviously injuries and the way that his past 2 seasons have ended. I think if he ends a season another way like that, like if it happens for a 3rd straight year, then those cries, I haven't put the injury label on Lamar yet, even though I know it's been frustrating for a lot of people. And obviously Lamar himself to have those 2 injuries happen in back-to-back years. But if it happens a 3rd year, that to me says, and I think those calls would be a lot louder if Lamar got injured for a 3rd season. So injuries are definitely a risk on the franchise tag if you play on it. The other risk is that Lamar would be kind of betting on the fact that maybe another guy get a fully guaranteed deal, or at least close to it, to drive up that market. And at the same time, I think we're going to see guys like Joe Burrow and Jalen Hurts and Justin Herbert and Trevor Lawrence sign for big money contracts. So even if those aren't fully guaranteed deals, at least the total money, there, the number that you see, is probably going to be bigger than some of these contracts. And again, reset the market and reset the market and reset the market. And that in turn could maybe bump Lamar's guaranteed money up. So if it's, $300 million with $250 guaranteed, that's more guaranteed money than Deshaun Watson got, even with this fully guaranteed $230. So that's something that could happen. I wouldn't rule out that possibility personally. I don't think it's necessarily super likely. And to me, again, the most ideal resolution for both sides is just figuring it out. Just if there's a trade, if they have to walk their separate ways, then just let it happen. If they can move forward together, fine. But they have to do this soon. I mean, it has to happen any day now, hopefully. But I don't know. I don't have a ton of confidence it will. And that to me is concerning, both for the organization and for Lamar, especially for the organization, because of how they can operate with their hands tied behind their back here. And in terms of what the Ravens actually did yesterday, 2nd day of free agency, they re-signed Trayvon Mullen, who is actually Lamar Jackson's cousin. So it might be, oh, Lamar, we got your cousin. Let's do this thing. No, but, they ended up claiming Mullen off of waivers from the Cowboys in January. And I actually didn't know they had to re-sign him. I thought he was already under contract, but I guess he had the free agent market. They re-signed him to a 1-year deal. Didn't play for the Ravens in 2022. Was a 2nd rounder of the Raiders, and, had stints, I believe, in Arizona, and is a depth piece. I think he's a solid option. Isn't a guy you want to necessarily rely on a ton, but he's a solid depth piece for them. I would still look for them maybe to try to re-sign Marcus Peters. Peters is becoming the best corner on the market. I think Peters might be the best corner left after James Bradbury went back to the Eagles, Byron Murphy going to the Vikings, obviously Jamel Dean re-signing with the Buccaneers on the 1st day. So Marcus Peters looking like one of the best, if not the best options on that corner market now. So we'll see what the Ravens do there. And again, team-friendly deal for me with Marcus Peters, but, regardless, then nothing. Nothing for the Ravens. I just think they're trying to feel out this market right now. It's been 2 days, I think, of frustration for a lot of people, and the fact that they just haven't done a lot. In fact, they've barely done anything. They've lost 3 really good contributors, assuming Calais Campbell doesn't come back, and they've re-signed Trayvon Mullen, and that's it. And again, as I've talked about, they also have the restricted free agents to worry about. They also have their draft class to worry about. I'm sure we'll see some more restructure news. Maybe they could do something with Marlon Humphrey or Mark Andrews or Ronnie Stanley. But, I mean, at this point, the ball's kind of in the hands of Lamar Jackson, where the Ravens can't be their full selves this offseason until some resolution happens. You can do the restructures, you can do the extension, but even if that cap hit first year gets lowered from $32 million to $25 million, or $32 million to $20 to $15, that helps. That gives you money to work with, and it maximizes your options. So at this point, I think the Ravens have to just figure out what they want to do here. Lamar Jackson has to figure out what's going on here. Again, as I talked about in the first segment, I don't think this relationship is irreparable, but based off of these last couple of days, couple of weeks, I think it has trended downward, and something needs to change there. I mean, if this relationship continues to, I guess, fracture, there's a danger of it becoming irreparable. And then at that point, if you lose Lamar for 2 first-round picks, if you're the Ravens, again, it might just be better for both sides to move on if stuff becomes really, really, really bad. But still, losing Lamar for 2 first-round picks after not trading him for more, that would be bad management by the Ravens and, bad mismanagement of the entire situation. So coming up, we'll talk a bit about what the Ravens could still do in free agency here. I talked a bit about Marcus Peters, but wide receiver targets, we'll answer some mailbag questions, and we'll get into a couple of mock drafts. So be sure to stay tuned. So lots to talk about on the show. But first, this episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. And you've heard me talk about this mobile game app. And if you ever thought you'd make a good GM, you have to give this game a try. It's not as easy as you might think to create a dynasty. And when you play Ultimate Football GM, you get to control and manage every strategic aspect of your team as you play through seasons and lead your team to glory, trying to build a historic dynasty. And the game really is a lot of fun. You have to make a ton of decisions. You can make good decisions. You can make bad decisions. And they can all have consequences on your franchise. And even once it's downloaded, you don't even need Wi-Fi to play. It's obviously an app play, and you can really do a ton with this game and make all the decisions to get your franchise off the ground, to make that dynasty. And with Ultimate Football GM, you're responsible for controlling the destiny of your franchise by hiring the right coaches and coordinators, managing all the finances, including negotiating player salaries and terms. Got to navigate your franchise through free agency, the draft, injuries, player personnel issues, and all the ups and downs of a season. All listen to challenging and realistic game rules. Ultimate Football GM is going to be free and playable offline. You can play on the go as you want and when you want to. Locked On Ravens listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise using promo code Locked On in all caps in the game store. That's Locked On in all caps. Make sure to check it out today. Download the game at ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. We are back. It's our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostraker still here with you on this midweek edition episode. Again, thank you so much for tuning in with us today, making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube, follow along in audio form as well. But we'll talk a bit about what the Ravens could do moving forward in free agency here. Day 3 coming up. And at the time of this recording, again, the only move, at least signing or re-signing Baltimore's made, is the re-signing of Trayvon Mullen. So hopefully some action comes over the course of these next couple of days here. And I do want to get into some mailbag questions. Well, first, do one from Rashad Robertson, who asked, do you think we will go after a wide receiver today? I hope so. I hope so. In terms of guys who went off the market yesterday, and I actually think this is really good in terms of Baltimore's potential acquisition of a wide receiver, whether it is through free agency or trade. Allen Lazard gets 4 years, $44 million from the New York Jets. Jacoby Myers gets 3 years, $33 million from the Las Vegas Raiders. To me, the wide receiver market was one where I was a little worried in terms of what the average annual values could be. It's $11 million both for Lazard and for Myers. That to me is a good sign. It's good news. Lazard and Myers were regarded, I think, from a lot of people as the top 2 options on the market. And I think for the Ravens, again, I kind of point back to DJ Chark. I know a lot of people aren't on board with Chark because he's not one of those big name guys like a DeAndre Hopkins or an Odell Beckham or a Cortland Sutton or Jerry Jeudy or even Adam Thielen. But I think he is one of the more realistic options for them. I also think Mecole Hardman could be realistic. That wouldn't be a guy I'd pay a ton of money for, but just feels Raven-y. I still would prefer DeAndre Hopkins in a trade. I'd be totally cool with Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy. Odell, if he's not on that $20 million asking price, completely cool with that. But again, can't be anywhere near $20 million for Odell a season. But to me, the Ravens need to look at and get 2 veterans. I think to me, 2 veterans is the right pick for them. So whether that is 1 free agent in DeMarcus Robinson or 1 trade in DeMarcus Robinson or 2 free agents, to me, veterans, 2 veterans and 2 young guys to put next to Rashad Bateman and Devin Duvernay, that is the path for me. Let's now also talk about a question from King of Norway. How much guaranteed and incentive dollars has Lamar lost by not having an agent? I mean, I think not having an agent has definitely slowed up the process. It's kind of murked it up a little bit. In terms of how much he's lost, I think we're not going to really know that until we see how many teams are in on him. I think if an agent was present for a lot of this process, maybe a deal between Baltimore and Lamar is already done. And in that, it's probably not fully guaranteed, but I think it might be closer to an acceptable, it's not fully guaranteed, but it's mostly guaranteed, something like that. Whereas without an agent, again, I I'm not saying Lamar not having an agent is not the worst thing ever. And for him, it's like, it's not this huge sin or anything. Like, it's totally within his right to not do this with an agent, but I just think it would have made things a little smoother and a little easier with a deal of this magnitude. A deal of this magnitude is very hard to put together, to construe, where there are so many factors. And again, as I've said before, like the Joe Flacco extensions were big. It is not in the same stratosphere of what this contract is going to be, whether it is for the Ravens or from another team. So I think this is a question that in a couple weeks we'll have a better, well, hopefully in a couple weeks, hopefully tomorrow, hopefully we'll have something by tomorrow where the Ravens and Lamar will have something, or it'll just be over and Lamar walks and that'll be that, because something needs to happen. But in terms of how much he's lost, an agent would have probably helped the negotiations between Baltimore and the Ravens. But now Lamar can talk to other teams. We'll see if a team's out there that's going to give him what he wants, fully guaranteed, or at least very close to that. Aaron asks, what are some realistic options at the receiver position that the team can look to go after? So I talked about this one a little bit with Rashad's question. I think DJ Chark's pretty realistic. Mecole Hardman is someone, maybe a guy like Mac Hollins. Like, those aren't, like, Chark to me is like the bottom of the, like, Chark isn't a big name, but I think you can still put him in the conversation if he can really produce and he can be a super, super, super solid guy. Hardman, I think, also can be solid, but to me, that's more of like your wide receiver 3. Mac Hollins, I know, is not going to get a lot of people excited. It's not one of my preferences, but again, that's just like feels Raven. In terms of trade, I still think DeAndre Hopkins is probably the most realistic. Maybe there's a guy who hasn't been mentioned a ton. I think Adam Thielen still isn't completely off the table. I mean, I know that the Ravens and could be in the market. They've gone that veteran route before, but I think Thielen has more to offer at this stage in his career than a Michael Crabtree did, or a Des Bryant did, or a Jeremy Maclin did. So we'll see there. I think DeMarcus Robinson is pretty realistic to come back to there. Next, a question from Positive Vibes 0611. If Lamar and EDC agree not to leak, and most assume the NFLPA is leaking stuff about both sides, why hasn't anybody asked the NFLPA directly what's going on? I'm sure there have been inquiries from the NFLPA from, reporters or, national media people. And I'm sure they don't want to get their hands dirty with that stuff. I know probably, they're advising them to do what they want them to do and say, Lamar, you should probably do this, or, this is what our advice is for that. But I don't think they would personally go out there, and maybe they would. I mean, it is completely possible. But in terms of what's going on, there have been very few leaks. And one of the leaks here from yesterday came from Lamar Jackson. So I don't know. The NFLPA isn't going to release like a full statement. Maybe there'd be a leak here or there, but I'm sure, the Ravens and Lamar have that agreement. Lamar kind of broke that, I feels like, yesterday, and the NFLPA probably is leaking a couple of things, but I don't think they'd like release a statement or do a full interview to put out all these contract details that Lamar would do there. Let's now get into a couple of mock drafts before we head out for the day here on Locked On Ravens. Again, we do mock drafts based off of what actually goes on in terms of the roster the Ravens have right now. So, I mean, Lamar's still on the team. Quarterback isn't a need for him because Lamar's still technically there. So we'll dive into one or two here. We'll first start off with a mock draft from Baltimore Wizard, who says corner and wide receiver heavy. So we got a trade down here. The Giants received 22, 159, and 200. The Ravens received 25, 89, 100, and 209. 25, Zay Flowers, the Boston College wideout as the selection. Garrett Williams, Syracuse corners, the pick at 86. Tank Dell, Houston wide receivers, the pick at 89. Travius Hodges Tomlinson, corner from TCU, is at 100. Jacorian Bennett, corner from Maryland's at 125. And D. Winters, TCU linebacker, is at 209. I like the trade down. It picks up an extra pick for Eric DeCosta. Again, I don't think Baltimore's ending this draft with 5 picks, regardless of the Lamar situation. DeCosta loves his picks. The Ravens love their picks. I'm sure there will be a trade down or just getting more picks somehow, some way throughout this offseason by the time draft weekend ends. Zay Flowers, I like the value at 25. In terms of 3 corners, I mean, I like the players. I like Garrett Williams a lot. Travius Hodges Tomlinson, I think, is very underrated. Jacorian Bennett had a great combine. But maybe you replace one of those guys, like maybe either Hodges Tomlinson or Bennett, maybe replace one of those guys with an edge rusher or a running back or an offensive lineman. That's because at 3 young corners, with already having Brandon Stevens and Pepe Williams and Jalen Armour-Davis, and, depending on how you classify Darius Washington in there as well, I think you need veteran options in that room also alongside Marlon Humphrey. And if you have 3 draft picks here, especially 3 guys who go before round 4 or in round 4, that could maybe pigeonhole you into maybe cutting a couple guys already, because they already took 2 guys last year. I think 2 was the magic number for me corner-wise this year. But still, I like the draft overall. I like the players by Baltimore Wizard. And then finally, we'll get into one here by Deku Miliotis Uzumaki, who has the Ravens taking Nolan Smith, the Georgia edge at 22. Michael Wilson, Stanford wideout at 86. Corian Bennett, Maryland corner at 125. Jalen Moreno Cropper, Fresno State wide receiver at 158. And Eric Gray, running back from Oklahoma at 199. Nolan Smith, we had a lot of Nolan Smith mock drafts this week. I like Nolan Smith as a prospect, but what I was saying throughout the course of this week is it depends how you feel about the investment in that position. Adafe Oye was a first rounder in 2021. David Ajabo, a second rounder in 2022. And then Nolan Smith being a first rounder in 2023. At that point, if you don't think that the Ravens should invest in that position any more than that, at least not early draft picks, then maybe wide receiver becomes that pick, corner becomes that pick. And again, I don't know who was on the board in this situation. Again, I like Nolan Smith. I do, don't get me wrong. And then you also have 2 wide receivers taken. The Corian Bennett pick, I think, is one that's going to be pretty popular moving forward. Then the sneaky needed running back there at 199. So solid over there from Deku. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Again, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel on YouTube, follow along in audio form. We have everything for you covered. Ravens 5 days a week, and especially if the Ravens sign a wide receiver, I'll be going live to talk about that here on YouTube, and also that audio will be up in audio form after the fact. And again, daily Ravens episodes 5 days a week here, both in YouTube and in audio form. When we get back in tomorrow, I'll be continue talking about what the Ravens are doing in free agency, getting more into the Lamar situation and those updates, and so much more. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and I will see you right back here tomorrow.